to our panel tonight. I'm really pleased to welcome Archbishop David Edwards from the Bishop of Fredericton, Bishop Sandra Fyfe, the Bishop of Nova Scotia and Prince Edward Island, and Bishop Lynne McNaughton, the Bishop of Kootenay. And I'm Ian Mobsby, one of the Diocesan Missioners from the Diocese of Niagara. So let's get into some big questions here, and there's no way we can cover everything we've just heard, but I think there's some pertinent questions for us to get into. So our first question I want to just approach is how do we parishes and dioceses move towards mission when this imminent frame pressurizes us to kind of over-focus and to manage decline rather than trust in God? I open that to any bishop to respond. Let's kick off.
I can say a few things. I think there's some simple things. We have to trust God. We have to pray more, and we have to listen to our communities. I think we have a choice to make about which narrative we belong to and which narrative we choose to tell. Last year at this conference, I remember Bishop Susan Bell saying that we need to figure out or decide which story we're in. And that's so true. If we read the Bible and if we follow the life of Jesus, we will see that God calls us to places where we don't know, we don't really know where that's taking us, but we know that God is leading us. So I think being able to lean into that trust, and to, through prayer and discernment, be attentive to kind of the winds of change around us. And I think too, as well as framing the narrative differently or telling the story differently, we also have ways to shape the agenda of our parish councils, of our diocesan gatherings. We can choose to put the financial information at the end of the agenda, which is what I did in a parish I served for a while, because every time we talked about money, it sucked the life out of the room. So we decided that needed to come at the end, and we needed to spend the first part of our meeting praying and dreaming and talking about how we were seeing God at work in our communities and how we wanted to respond. And then the money part was about how would we enable that to happen? Not we have no money, therefore we can't do anything. But here's what we want to do. How do we resource that? So again, if we flip how we approach it, we have control over some of these things. We have ways to change how we enter these conversations with people and bring vitality and curiosity and courage into those conversations.
Thanks, Bishop Sandra. Any other responses?
And I would agree with what Bishop Sandra says. I wonder, first of all, I think we have to go back to the future, to quote something, which is, and shows how old I am, that we have to come back to an Anglican basic, and the Anglican basic that we have to come back to is the cure of souls. In other words, we are called into a geographical area or whatever in order to see people change in all kinds of different ways. And I don't think we've taken that seriously, first of all. I think that is our fundamental DNA within the Anglican Church. So that's the first thing. I think, again, this whole issue of trust is really important. And I think we have to recognize that part of the frame that frames us goes beyond those things which Bishop Susan said, but actually goes into two major things. One is the whole, and this is across the Western world, the whole issue of the way in which the church is perceived as abusive. And that stops our mission in many ways. And the other, in our context, is the way in which residential schools, etc., have impacted the way we are. And I think unless we take those things seriously, we have a problem. I also think that what that does is it stops things happening at the macro level. And so I would, and I'm going to finish with this at the moment, and so we have to look at the micro level. And the micro level is people don't trust the church, but they do trust congregations and people they know. And one of the things we have to do is to say, okay, how does that congregation more adequately interact with its community for the gospel? And one of the things I say, whenever I read a license now to clergy, it says the 13th year of our consecration, which is really scary. But pretty much right from the beginning, what I've said to clergy who asked me the question, what do I do? Is I say, look in the mirror, practice saying, how can we help? Until you actually look as though you believe it. And then go out and start to talk to people in your community and ask that question. And I can honestly say that when that has happened among clergy or laity in our diocese, when people have actually gone and asked that question, they've found ways into mission which have enabled them to impact their community for good and to facilitate the cure of souls.
Great. Yeah, I think so many multiple layers in that question. I mean, the imminent frame, I think my favorite line about the imminent frame is that Charles Taylor says there's no room for mystery in the imminent frame. And that's what we have with a God who shows up, is mystery. How do we move into radical trust? I mean, I think when I watch my own life and those around me, when we develop trust in God, it's because something has completely fallen apart and isn't working anymore. I have several bumper stickers from the speech from our Prime Minister. One is "Nostalgia is not a strategy." I love that line, but also, this isn't a transition in the church. This is a disruption. And that's where we will learn to trust in God, because we can't trust our systems or our way of operating or the things that have worked in the past. They don't work now. My experience is that people don't want to hear what the reality is. To name the reality is super important, and people resist. When we said in this diocese about, I don't know, when was it, 4 or 5 years ago, our structures are palliative, people went like, they didn't want to hear it, or at least the vocal people didn't want to hear it. How dare we say the church was palliative? I said, I didn't say the church was palliative. The church belongs to God. The structures of our particular denomination, diocese, parishes are palliative. And for every person who went sort of ballistic about that, there were 10 people who wrote to me and said, thank you for naming the reality. We know this. We've known this. Thank you for saying the truth about it. But in the midst of that profound kind of hitting bottom, I often quote the line from Anna Briggs' hymn. It's 600 in Common Praise. It was written for General Synod. The church that faces dying shares life beyond the cross. And I've watched that happen with a couple of the parishes who went into panic. One church who's only owned half the building, and when the other co-owners sold and wanted to sell, no way that they could buy it. They couldn't handle it. And we deconsecrated the building. We had a grief, all the mourning and giving thanks for community and all of that. And then the deacon said, okay, when we process out with a few of the wall hangings, ring the bell for the last time. We're going to be in a mobile home and drive away. And they became a house church. And they are evangelists for how freeing that has been. They don't have a building and they have a church. So they discover that freedom, and they're kind of pushing other churches to look at it, which has pushed other churches saying, oh no, we need our building. We need it for mission. We need kind of seeing their building again. What was it? Bishop Bell said, a container for mission rather than our beloved place of worship. So I think I'm way over my time, but
no, I just want to pursue that a bit further, Bishop Lynne, when you're going with that, because I think what I heard loud and clear in Bishop Susan's thing was that just how debilitating that combination of anxiety and scarcity that then seems to take out, that call to faithful risk taking. to reach the de-churched and unchurched. And I think deeply ironically, at a time when so many unchurched people are spiritual seeking. So I'm wondering, how do we help parishes and churches and even missional communities to move beyond this kind of anxiety and scarcity to take faithful risks?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it is preaching abundance, like consistently saying, I think the Holy Spirit has gifted us with everything we need for right now, right? We have the people around this table that God needs in this community right now. People don't believe you when you say that, but I think that's one of my constant messages, right? God can work with small, that, and getting people, this is very un-Anglican, but getting people to give testimony to where God already has showed up in their own life. We don't talk about that, but once people do, with the congregation I last served, we did stewardship moments every week, 3 minutes. Was never quite 3 minutes, but 3 minutes on what God is doing in your life and kind of around stewardship of my gifts. And everybody in the congregation had a turn over the kind of 2 years, and it shifted the dynamic of, we can talk about what God's up to. Yeah.
Thanks,
God's
Bishop.
faithfulness, right?
Bishop Sandra, Archbishop David.
It's interesting because I think some of it, in our diocese, I would say that some of how we've moved to that is by naming the scarcity and saying parishes have realized that if they don't do something differently, they've got 5 years left. Some have maybe 2, some have 10. So, there's a sense in which do we really want to, if we want a future, if we see and hope for a future, I think God has a future for the church, but like, what do we need to do in this moment? And so I think it's encouraged brave risk taking in our diocese by some congregations who they kind of have we've got nothing to lose. Let's try this. And I think with guidance and with prayer and with good leadership and a reality check about kind of where they are and what the context is for mission and ministry. I mean, when they can know that, especially if the diocese can come alongside and offer leadership and support and guidance to them. We've seen parishes who have been able to take risks and move into new models of ministry, whether it's ecumenical shared ministry or new models of shared ministry or team ministry. And then sometimes they thought it was out of desperation, but it led to flourishing. And they learned that, okay, like we thought this was really our only option, but wow, God is doing something with this. And so God speaks in the scarcity, like God works in the scarcity to bring new life. And so what is scarce? If the scarcity is around money or numbers of people or whatever, what is abundant? I think it's what Bishop Lynne was saying. Where's abundance? Because there is abundance. It might not be where we are right in this moment, but there's abundance in the community. God is doing things there. And how do we join in? How do we notice it? And how do we come alongside that? And how do we partner with groups that are already doing that? And how do we help parishes to move beyond kind of looking around internally and looking outward to seeing all of that? But I think the scarcity and the anxiety can also be a catalyst for change. So I think sometimes you have to move people out of it and they have to see a hopeful future. But I think then you read the Bible because that's what we see over and over again. That's the story of God's people who have these moments of feeling that it's all over, it's all done and finished. But God sees something different. God sees a new future and God leads them there. And again, that ability to worry about faithfulness and not success the way we've defined it in numbers, in the demographic shift that we saw that is not going to come back. The baby boom was a moment and it's not coming back. And we planned for that reality and that was the blip. That wasn't the norm. And we're trying to go back to something that was not the norm. And I think we have to help people see that living faithfully will lead to abundant living. And it might look different, but it will be fruitful and it really will be life-giving.
Thanks, Bishop Sandra.
And I think another thing that people need to hear is that a small church is not a failed big church.
Yes.
Right. Exactly.
Because we tend to see, oh yeah, well, so-and-so mega church over the road, or the Wesleyans in our case, who do it this way and they're growing. To a degree, that's great. But the other aspect of that is that the small church that's impacting into its community is actually going to accomplish things. And I think one of the things that we also do on a practical level is, because of what Bishop Sandra said about the way we structured ourselves, particularly in the baby boom, is we decided as congregations or whatever that we have to do everything. And so we tended to take a 12 gauge approach to things, where you shoot your 12 gauge off and it flies out and you might hit something. And we've tried to do all of those things. We need to and I'm sorry to use this imagery because I know it's not really appropriate at the moment, but it's the best I can do. We need to take a rifle and we need to say, what is it that our community is looking to us for? And that means we have to ask those questions, and we have to prayerfully, as churches, and I think this is important, prayerfully discover our vocation within the community. Often what we do is we talk about vocation as my vocation, David Edwards' vocation, which happens now to have led him all the way to being the Bishop of Fredericton. And all those people who grew up with him in Madeley in Shropshire are totally amazed that that is the case. But it's not my vocation. My vocation is part of a larger vocation, which is the vocation of the church. And the problem I find is that parishes don't spend, and individual Christians as well, don't spend enough time praying into vocation. A question for a parish to pray into, and I really mean pray into, not an opening prayer at the beginning of vestry, but actually pray into, is what is the vocation of this congregation in this place at this time? And my experience is that you'll begin to find out just in shadows, maybe, and then begin to take the steps along the journey, because then you discover what it is that God is calling to. So just to give you one illustration, and you're going to see another illustration, I believe, from the Diocese of Fredericton in a video at some point. But to give you an illustration of what I'm talking about, one of the priests who I said, go and ask the question, what can we do? How can we help? The local school said, do you cater? Do you do meals? And his response was, is the Pope a Catholic? Of course we do. We're Anglicans. We feed people. And so what has happened in that church is their outreach has become feeding school end of year events, and also want something part through the year. And that's become the way in which they've really impacted their community. So actually in the worship space, because they don't have fixed pews, people come, the kids come in, different school, different day, and they're catered a meal. What also has happened is that they have a special celebration for school staff, anyone who wants to come, and they actually assign different members of their congregation to pray for the individual teachers in the schools. And they'll ask them at that event, is there anything we can pray about? And some of the teachers say, no, of course not. And others share quite complex things. But it's that whole thing of, that's how they discovered their vocation, and it's led to a number of other things which I won't go into. But that vocation piece for the congregation, for the gathered community, I believe is really important.
What I'm hearing from all three of you is this kind of importance of this kind of reconnect between parish neighborhoods and parish churches. I think one thing I'm hearing in Bishop Susan's address, so maybe I ought to say that as well, but also we kind of need to let go of this kind of Christendom pastoral mode where we do things at people, where we don't really do the Jesus thing about building up relationships. So I really want to push what Bishop Susan said here, which I think I heard a number of times when she said, and I'll say this to quote, that there is a disconnect between parishes and parish neighborhoods, which will not resolve itself without an intentional response.
Yes.
I'm wondering what you think that intentional response would be from your own perspective.
And I think Bishop Sandra said it, listen, 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 right? Don't go out and tell people what we're about, but I mean, if it's about building partners for what the neighborhood needs, who's around you, it is listening. It's discovering the needs and responding to those rather than what you think we're supposed to be responding to. It's been incredibly inspiring this week to watch all the things that are coming from churches in Minneapolis about immediate need. There are people stuck in their homes who can't get out to get groceries. We will go and take groceries to them, right? And not just the churches, high school principals, they're saying, how do we meet this need, right? So who's our neighbor? Sesame Street question, who are the people in your neighborhood, and get out there rather than, and that's very hard for Anglicans. When we had a workshop for the province here, the ecclesiastical province, on how to prepare for emergencies, fires, etc., all of those things that are happening. What can the church offer? First of all, I think we have to let go of the thing that anything that says we're doing this by ourselves. Who can we partner with? Is it the municipality? Is it another religious group? Is it just, we can't do it all ourselves. We could partner with a whole bunch of things. But military personnel, Anglican, Hounsel Drover, I forget his military title, I'm sorry. He said, go to your town. There's got to be someone whose work it is to be ready for emergencies, and tell them what you could offer and ask them what they need. And he said, forget being too small or whatever. What can we offer? Say what you have. Sometimes they have no idea. And when you say to them, we have 3 elderly women who on an hour's notice could show up with 3 dozen muffins, they will say, oh, thank you. And they will take note of it, right? Like, just be who you are, offer what you can. You have a church, you have pews that people could sleep on. So it's that, but it takes us going out and asking, how can we help?
I think I just want to push slightly about the difference between mission and outreach.
Yes.
And there's something about because I think my experience of the Anglican Church of Canada, it loved doing social justice projects where we do things for people, but then we somehow lose our Christian identity about how do we open up this missional thing about opening up Christ to people. Yes, through loving service, but also that sense of trying to catch up with what God is doing missionally, not just in terms of social justice. You see what I'm trying to make? So how do we keep hold of that missional edge in how we engage with de-churched, unchurched people?
Yes. So a book that changed my life, written 30 odd years ago by the then evangelism director of the World Council of Churches, a man called Raymond Fung. And Raymond Fung wrote a little book, and you can still get it online. It's 45 pages long, and it's called The Isaiah Vision. Mm-hmm. And basically what Fung says is, what we do is we find people of good faith in our community and see how we can work with them. I also think we actually can find people of bad faith in our community and work with them, but that's another story. But we find people of good faith in our community and see how we can work with them. We then, at some other point down the road, give them an opportunity to say thank you to God for the community in which we live. That might be a church service, it could be anything. And finally, we also open up ourselves to have opportunities to introduce people to Jesus, who we have established credibility with. And that 3-stage thing is what I've basically taught for the whole of my ministry, from being an evangelism advisor in Chelmsford Diocese to whatever else I've done. It's that three-phase thing. And I've seen it work in numerous parishes where people become brave enough to be able to say, okay, the reason that I'm doing this is because I walk with someone who is called Jesus, and this is the difference. And not being in the sense of wanting to bang people over the head with a big black Bible, but actually say, this is my friend. And I think that is, I think that's how you move that forward from that sort of community involvement into introducing God into the equation, for want of a better word.
I think too, we should assume that people are seeking Jesus, that they're seeking faithful, loving Christian community, and they might not be able to name that in the terms we would use. But one of the mistakes I made a lot when I was in a small town doing ministry and I had my two children there is I would go to the parent groups and stuff with my kids. And I was really intentional about, okay, I'm here as a parent. I'm not here as the rector of a parish. But what people were interested in, and when I was in a book group, with people who were from all walks of life, they were curious about a faith perspective. They really wanted to hear that, and families wanted to hear that because they were going through all the things in life that everybody goes through: loss and transition, and changes in employment, and marriages that were struggling, or relationships that were struggling, and they were looking for something that we know that faith can offer them in that. So I think I had to learn to be less reluctant, thinking that I was imposing on them or offering, like, again, hitting them over the head with something, when actually they were open to that in a way that I didn't know. And I had to just, I think, watch for signs for that, pray about that, and be respectful, of course, if that's not what people are seeking. But to know that right now we're living in a time of incredible spiritual renewal and curiosity and engagement. And so I think we need to have the courage to be able to open those conversations with people, like Bishop David said about Archbishop David, about how we got through this or how this has helped us in our life. But there are ways friendship leads to that, because we talk about the things that matter in our lives. You talk about the book you're reading that has been transformational in how you see a part of your life. So why wouldn't you talk about your faith in that way to people that you get to know? But building those authentic relationships and being willing to trust that you have something to offer that may help them in their life. I think we just have to be less shy about it.
So I'm aware that time is now passing, but I've just got one final thing. I wanted to invite you just to share a few final words, really to the point, because in this imminent cultural frame, it's really tough to be mission-minded. So those who are called to be missioners, church planters, evangelists, not easy in the church at the moment where it's struggling with this imminent cultural frame. What would you as bishops want to say to those who feel called to that sort of renewal of the church, just in a few words each?
So I'd want to say faith is spelt R-I-S-K, and that people need to risk. But I'd also want to say, not just to these two fellow bishops, because I know these two, but I want to say to all the bishops, we've got to be willing to back them up.
Yes, absolutely.
And not allow them to be pushed down. We have to be able to say to people who are taking risks, I have your back.
Yes.
Thank you.
And so that would be my 2 cents worth.
Yeah. That's what I wrote down for the answer to this question was applaud experiments, right? And know that they take a long time, right? I was part of a mission in another diocese, which shall remain nameless, that they funded for 2 years, and that was it. And it's like, it takes a lot longer than that. So yes, as leaders, we have to have their back. We have to say, yes, it's risky, and go for it. And I don't know. I think it's also celebrating those risk takers and with joy and hope and anticipation. And
Thank you.
Yeah.
I think too, in combination with those, I think we need to bring people like that together for mutual learning and encouragement
Yes.
and support with like-minded people, because I think they need to know that the vision that they see for the church is a faithful vision, and that God is in the midst of that, and God is calling them to that. And so it might take the church a while to catch up, but in the meantime, we have to put them with other people to enable that vision that they have to grow, and for them to see how God is calling them to venture forth into that. So equipping them, encouraging them, but bringing them together so that they don't feel like they're alone, because they may be the only one in their parish that sees this. So we can't let that kind of, that die on the vine. We really need to kind of place them in opportunities where they can flourish and feel supported.
I actually think the flip side of that, if I may, is that
very quickly, because we need to move
okay,
on.
sorry, a couple of times I've said to the people who say, well, why don't they just come to our 11 o'clock service? We're doing this already. Is I say, no, back off. Let this happen with the people who have energy, and it won't look like what you already have. Right?
Archbishop David, Bishop Sandra, Bishop Lynne, thank you so much for your time. We're now going to move on to our stories. Over to Emily, I think.